Peace, family. That was whack. Peace, family. All right. This is the ism of race. So when I was young, my family moved around a lot. And after spending most of my childhood in Puerto Rico, we ended up moving to the state of Maryland, where I was the only Puerto Rican in my middle school. But I was able to make a best friend, Travis. We were cool, hung on each other's houses, played video games, even helped each other out with homework. Travis was white. Months down the line, I show up to school one day, and I see Travis, and I go to shake his hand. What's up, Travis? But he wouldn't look at me or give me his hand. So I said, what's the matter? And he says, I'm not allowed to speak to you anymore. And I say, why not? He said, you got to understand, my parents are racist. I'm sorry. Well, I was so hurt, and I just lost my best friend, and I didn't understand why. And I thought to myself, racist? What the hell is that? I never even heard the word before. I was never exposed to it growing up. My family ended up moving around a whole lot more, and the concept of racism was still inescapable because I ended up having many more negative experiences with it. When I got to college in 2000, President Bill Clinton holds a press conference and announces to the world that the human genome mapping had finally been completed. And he was also excited to announce that all human beings, regardless of race, were more than 99.9% the same. I cheered, racism's over. Racists are gonna have to stop being racist now, there's no more argument for it. But then 9/11 happened, and racism and xenophobia were at an all-time high, kind of how it's like today, right? And I felt for people experiencing racism because I was all too familiar with it. So I invested a lot of my study into my culture and into my history. In the search for my identity, I wanted to know more. And the deeper that I dug, the more I found that as a human being and as an American, how interconnected I was to the whole world. I found that the whole world was within me. In my study, I also learned to love and appreciate words because I found that by taking a close look at them, one could find deeper meaning. And I found that the solution to the problem of racism lies in the roots of the language created by the people who created this pseudo and disproved science. Racism is propagated in our language. So as an example, let's use the word racism, right? We have the race and the ism. An ism is a practice, a system, a philosophy, a science to sort of speak of. Race's original meaning was a group of people of common descent. And it wasn't until the 18th century that we began to associate it to the color of our skin so as to justify genocide and slavery in our tumultuous history. Combined, you have racism, a science developed so as to create a perfect logical loophole, a justification for the inhumane ability to dehumanize others and turn them into property in the eyes of the law. Now, as for the races, these were created by naturalists by the names of Christoph Meiners and Johann Blumenbach. Blumenbach based his on skull structure and divided human beings into 5 categorizations: Caucasians white, Mongolians yellow, Americans red, Malays brown, and Ethiopians black. He placed Caucasian at the top of the structure, where he found himself, of course, and the rest of the races degraded downwards according to the melanization of their skin. Light at the top, dark at the bottom. He actually suggested that if black people worked hard enough, they could regress towards their original state, a white person. So, to either use racial vocabulary or to fully invest the belief of self into a racial categorization makes one a practitioner of the science of race, a racist. Now, this science was written in 1776, and even though it was written 240 years ago, it still has a powerful grip on the construct of being an American, because the founders themselves subscribed to these ideologies and embedded them into America's foundation. See, they themselves, under the guise of racism, dehumanized others and turned them into property in the eyes of the law. Racism, the science and economics of our skin. And we're not talking biology, an actual science that has a systemic, logical process. If we were talking biology, we'd understand that there's dozens of skin variations and that these come from the presence of tiny little crystals in our cells that give our bodies the ability to either absorb or reflect sunlight. Our skin color does not determine our humanity. Our skin color is our body's relationship to the sun. See, our body's beautiful and intelligent that way. It will modify and adapt itself to any environment, not deserving of it being attached to a social construct or to negative associations of being or to be used to dehumanize others. In this particular mental agreement, we were declared for as human beings. We forgot that we declare ourselves. So if we could change our vocabulary and our language and our affirmation of being, then we can affirm ourselves from a position of empowerment instead of a position of inferiority, thus affecting the id, our subconscious, and our identity. Now, take this comic application question as an example, right? Most of us, think about how many times you've been asked to check one of these boxes. Think of which one you usually check and how many times you've been asked to do so over the course of your life. Do you really understand what these words mean? Now, let's use this as an example, being that we live in America and that most of these identities are hyphenated with American, we'll start there. If you affirm yourself to be an American, please raise your hand. All right. And out of everybody that raised their hand, if you understand what the word America itself means and where it comes from, not the idea behind it, not freedom and justice, I mean the actual word itself, please raise your hand. All right? So, comment. I've done this all around the country. In most of the places I go, people do not understand the meaning of these words, and kind of applies to the rest of these. So let's keep moving. And to make it a little bit clearer, let's attach these to Blumenbach's race model. American is red. Blumenbach referred to the Native American, as did the father of American scholarship and education, Mr. Webster himself, in his 1828 first edition dictionary, defining American originally as copper-colored people. But today, to be from the United States of America makes one an American. But we forget that America goes all the way up from Greenland and Alaska, all the way down to Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, thus North and South America. This is all America, and we are all Americans. However, nobody stops to ask, if credit is given to discoverers of land and water, then how come we don't call ourselves Colombians after Christopher Columbus, who discovered America? I mean, I'm pretty sure we used to. This is why we call our nation's capital the Washington District of Columbia, but for some reason we moved over to being American. Well, this was because Christopher Columbus died believing he was in India. It was the cartographer Amerigo Vespucci who discovered that Christopher Columbus did not discover another route to India, but a whole new continent altogether. So credit was given to him of the naming on the land on the map, America. So when you affirm yourself to be an American, you're calling yourself by the name of a man that discovered that a man made a mistake in his discoveries. An Italian man from Florence, Italy. You call yourself by an Italian man's name. And when a Native American is affirmed as such, it's still not true to who they are, what their name really is. I mean, they're calling themselves by an Italian man's name. And as Indians, they're affirming themselves by a culture and a people from the country of India halfway across the world they have no direct relationship to. They affirm themselves as a mistake. And being that there's thousands of cultures in the Americas whose skin colors range from the lightest of skin to the darkest of skin, Native American is not a race. Today, some believe American to be synonymous with Caucasian. The Caucasian comes from the Caucasus Mountains, a mountain range that divides Europe and Asia. Today, the present-day countries of Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. A true Caucasian is a resident of this region. The word Caucasus itself means mountain. However, you have millions of people in the Americas who call themselves by the name of a land and a people halfway across the world they have no direct relationship to, nor have they ever lived on a mountain. Blumenbach himself included Arabs and people of Indian descent into this categorization because of their skull structure. Therefore, a Caucasian skin color can range from the lightest of skin to the darkest of skin. Caucasian is not a race. Then we have Asian. Most of us associate Asian to slanted-eyed people, but we forget that Asia encompasses 2/3 of the world's population, 1/3 of the Earth's landmass, speaks over 2,000 dialects, and has 48 countries ranging from Russia to Japan to Iraq to Afghanistan. Asia, from the word Asuwa, which is present-day Western Turkey, whose name was spread as far as the Far East due to Alexander the Great's conquest. So when a Chinese person affirms themselves as an Asian, they're calling themselves by the name of a land and a people they have no relationship to. And an Asian skin color can range from the lightest of skin to the darkest of skin. Asian is not a race. African comes from Scipio Africanus, the great Roman military general who conquered northern Africa during the famed Battle of Carthage, and whose credit was given on the naming of the land on the map, Africa. So when an African American is affirmed as such, they're calling themselves by the names of two white Italian men, both African and American, alluding to the grouping of thousands of cultures from around the world, whose skin colors range from the lightest of skin to the darkest of skin. African American is not a race. Latino and Hispanic are identities based on the premise of language. Hispanic comes from Hispania, which is a Latin term for Iberia, the present-day countries of Spain and Portugal. Formed during the census in the 1980s, this categorization attempts to group thousands of American cultures under the banner of speaking Castellano, which is a dialect within Iberia, not a language that everybody in the Americas speaks. So in its essence, it is exclusive, right? However, Hispanic skin color range from the lightest of skin to the darkest of skin. Hispanic is not a race. Latino comes from Latinus or Latium, the geographic area of Rome before the establishment of the Roman Empire. And its people were called the Latins. So here again, millions of people from the Western Hemisphere calling themselves by the name of a land and a culture and a people halfway across the world they have no direct relationship to and probably didn't know existed, and whose skin colors range from the lightest of skin to the darkest of skin. Latino is not a race. None of them are real, nor do they carry any concrete meaning, just assumed associations. And these words don't have any power on their own. We give them power, tools for social navigation. And when we get to realize that we're the ones that give them power and meaning, then we become responsible for our words and our actions. If we are or miseducated in any way about the truth of our human story, with all its faults and all its glories, and somehow end up internalizing that we're inferior, our chances of living into our potential decrease in probability. Because affirming yourself without understanding can impede who you are. Now, to make this practical and personal, take this study done by Malcolm Gladwell in his book, Blink. Two groups of African Americans, same academic qualification, given the same test. And while group one scored at an average that could be determined, the second group was given a prep questionnaire where they were asked, are you black, yes or no? And as this group all circled yes, they scored 50% lower than their counterparts. In this case, asserting blackness as a racial construct came attached with a position of inferiority. In this case, race affected performance. The test takers self-sabotage. They believe that black is on the bottom of the ladder. Well, when I read this, I thought to myself, what if that second group was pre-prepped to understanding the truth and the beauty and the power behind the story of melanated people in the world? Would they have performed better? What if people who were never exposed to the knowledge of their culture and their history were exposed to it? Would they perform better? So I took it on. I collected as much information about history and culture in the Americas. I traveled around the world to experience it and set out to educate as many as I could. And as I've educated thousands across the country, I've generally gotten the same response. People expressing their gratitude for feeling free to declare who they are, a declaration that does not have to be associated to the concept of race. Then I thought to myself, how could I take this to a larger scale? So not just through study, but personal experience, have I realized the power between the relationship of our frame of thought and what manifests in our physical reality. And being that many of us are mentally imprisoned by a justification or a lie told for a justification, who better to work with than people who manifested prison in their lives? Another justification. Who better to work with than with prisoners? In this county, Blacks and Latinos make up 40% of the population, yet find themselves at the 80th percentile inside of our county facility. Dumbfounded by this statistic, I wrote and proposed a curriculum to the Department of Corrections to teach inmates what I called cultural and social consciousness education under the premise of community reintegration and the Second Chance Act. So for the past 3 years, I've been working with the self-medicated, drug-addicted population, men and women, many of them suffering, I hypothesize, because they forgot their greatness. A population whose recidivism rates dropped drastically due to this remembrance and newfound self-awareness through cultural and social consciousness education. I run this education on the actual tears, just me and them. And so many times have I have them stand up with this realized look in their face, proclaim their humanity, and denounce racism, even though they themselves were racist their whole lives, to the point where it created a sense of unity amongst the inmates to the point where you could walk into a jail setting and if you could imagine positive energy emanating from that room. I took this education, carried it to the staff of correctional facilities, and began to work with juveniles at juvenile detention centers, helping them, educating them, and mentoring them, and had many successful outcomes. One of my best cases was that I was referred an 18-year-old who was in the 10th grade. No motivation, no drive to want to move forward. And within a few weeks of the education, he went from being a sophomore in high school to a freshman in college. He just finished his first semester. And as of this year, cultural and social consciousness education will be implemented throughout the Jersey City School District. So with much success, with much success behind this education, I understood it was because people found a foundation within themselves. Knowledge of self, knowledge of their culture and their history, and knowledge of their ability to have an impact on the world. Maybe there can a youth with no motivation or drive want to move forward. So this is a call to action. That may we realize the importance of learning our own culture and the culture of others, and embed that into our education, into our employment, in our institutions, and guarantee racism won't know how to rear its ugly head ever again. And instead of feeling inferior and undeserving when it comes time to answer one of the most important questions in life, what am I? That may we understand that however we answer affirms who we are in the present moment, and that affirmation of being is tied to all the beauty and all the struggle of our ancestry, allowing us to be filled with love and move in freedom, and allow others to do so as well, regardless of their body's relationship to the sun, as human beings with all the rights that they deserve by declaring such. And even more so, that as a father of 5 beautiful children, that we learn to create a world that communicates unity, so that maybe one day they won't have to come home sad and confused because their friends won't talk to them because of their race. So I leave you all with this. In order to be empowered, one must understand the power and the right behind self-declaration. Where my humans at?